Welcome to Movate Talks, Business Insights Unplugged. Join us as we share insights and perspectives from technology and operations leaders, industry analysts, and visionaries on how today's technology trends are transforming their businesses and communities. Sit back and enjoy the episode.
Hello and welcome to Movate Talks, Business Insights Unplugged. I'm Cyriac Joswin, Senior Vice President and Global Business Head at Movate, your podcast host for the day. For this episode, we are thrilled to welcome Nemi George, Chief Information Security Officer and Head of IT at PDS Health. Nemi has been a testament of true leadership, innovation, and disruption in this ever-evolving landscape of cybersecurity. This year, he was recognized as one of the top 100 CISOs globally. That speaks volumes about his impact in this field. While he's an accomplished professional, he believes in giving back to the community with his pivotal work with the Information Systems Audit and Control Association, also known as ISACA, which is the global non-profit organization recognized for its guidance, credential, education, and training to the community. Nemi serves as a distinguished chapter head for the Orange County. Nemi, I'm super excited to have you as our guest today.
Thank you, Cyriac. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. Nemi, I was going through your profile and I was doing a bit of research about your career, and it's a very impressive journey across many years. And I'm sure when you talk a little bit about your journey, it spans across continents, it spans across different culture. Talk us more about, how has this journey been from where you were growing up to where you are today? And are there any standout moments, that has shaped up your professional path?
Yeah, so I've been lucky to work in several different countries and continents, as you said. I've worked in, starting from the top, I've worked in Nigeria, I've worked in the UK, in the US, in India, and so over 4 different continents and getting to work with thousands of people, it's been interesting, and there's so many different standout moments for me. The biggest things that I look back on is just my ability to drive change. I always tell people that when you leave an organization, you should be able to leave a bit of yourself with that company. And long after you're gone, people should be able to come in and say, oh, this is what Nemi built when he was here. And, we didn't have this, and he showed up and he did this. There's got to be something tangible that you'll leave. And my example might be really, really basic, but for me, this was the moment that clicked. I worked for a company, years ago called Yes Telecom. There were 3 of us in advanced solutions support, and there was about 60 people in customer care. And so you can imagine 60 to 3, and these 60 people were responsible for taking customer calls and then passing them to us. Now, this company was in a town called Manchester in the UK. And if you know anything about Manchester, it is a university town. And so they had about 5 universities back then in this town. And so the point being, a lot of these people that worked for this organization, they didn't really care about IT. These were largely students who just wanted to make a quick buck on the side. And so, of course, they're not taking the training seriously. They don't really follow any real processes. They're just not invested. And we were getting swamped. Like 3 of us, we were getting blown away with the amount of calls. And a lot of them was just so silly, right? No troubleshooting was done. And so I got up one day and I was just fed up with it. And so what I did was I created this little credit card sized troubleshooting guides, and I call them Tech the Boxes, right? TECH the boxes. And the idea was whenever they got a call on, GPRS, PCM, CIA cards, USB dongles, BlackBerry troubleshooting. iPhones were not even a thing back then. Whenever they got a call, they had to go through this 4 or 5 questions to get basic information. I created this guides on my own, had them all up, laminated them, got blue tack and tacked them onto everyone's monitor. I sent out comms to the entire customer care team the next morning. It's like, hey, you'll find some cards on your monitor as you come in. Read those cards. And we will not be taking any calls from you if you haven't gone through and checked the boxes. And in one fell swoop, every one of those people had to follow the process. They all learned a little bit of IT because they had to do some troubleshooting, and we had some time to breathe. And that was the start, the catalyst of just looking back and saying, you know what, you can complain about the problems all you want, or you can just seize them, seize the opportunity and do something and fix something. And anyway, the rest is history. Ever since then, I pretty much go around looking for what am I going to fix today? And how am I going to make my job better and hopefully the job of others better as well?
No, this is interesting. And what I hear from you is you've tried to be a change agent, but you've done that creatively. I like the way you said, instead of tick the box, it's tick the box. That's innovative. I've never heard that, but that's very, very interesting. And then I think you've embraced change also as you moved along, right? And one of the changes I was observing in your career is how you sort of uh, moved from a telecom vertical to a healthcare vertical, right? So you were working with, Vodafone, and before that also, as you just mentioned, and then here you are with PDS, right? So how does this transition happen, and how do you look at, you moving from a vertical to another vertical? Because these are separate verticals, right? These are separate verticals. It has its own nuances, both regulatory compliances and things like that. Or are there similarities between these sectors? So your thoughts on change and your thoughts on your own career moving from one to the other.
Absolutely. I think with a lot of these industries, there's an underlying technology stack that is essentially the same, right? Irrespective of the organization or the industry vertical you work in, there's certain things that are the same, right? You have endpoints, you have servers, you have data that needs to be protected. I think the very first thing that you need to do when you are switching industries, it's just understanding the nuances around regulations, as an example, as you mentioned. Once you understand what is it that I'm absolutely required to protect. When I was at Vodafone, we had our internal, network IP environments, but we were on the enterprise side. So we had several customers. And I think for me, this was maybe what made the transition a little bit easy, because working within Vodafone Global Enterprise, I had a lot of big global healthcare customers. Novartis, AstraZeneca, to name a few, were my customers. And so the level of scrutiny that we had to go through in managing those accounts was, I guess, very good preparation for transitioning into managing a healthcare organization. Now, I will tell you that there are particular nuances when you're managing a healthcare organization in the States, because you have different states with different laws on data retention and data protection, and so you've got to understand all of those. But once you have mapped out all of the different controls, and you have an overarching control set that you're managing too, it becomes relatively easy to manage the security program. But you mentioned a critical point, which is change management. Everything I've talked about is really on the technical and on the governance side. With change management, you really just need to engage. And I think that's one of the areas that security and IT professionals in general haven't done a great job, right? As much as I have worked with a lot of healthcare organizations, I've never worked for a healthcare organization. And I give you one simple example. One of the things that early conversations I had when I came here was around certain end of life equipment. And for me, with my security hat on, I'm like, well, we can't be using these equipment. These are end of life and end of support equipment. But a lot of these were embedded medical devices, and there just wasn't anything else out there, right? These were, from a medical standpoint, these were the most expensive, the best leading edge technology for doing certain things in the dental and the medical space. So when you realize that, this is not just a Windows, 7 or Windows 8 computer, this is a $200,000 state of the art dental equipment, that changes your mindset. Now you've got to think of how you protect it, how you work within the parameters you have, whether that's microsegmentation, carving out separate VLANs for it, or just looking at the traffic and saying, I'm only going to allow this port to communicate with that port, within these business hours, whatever restrictions you need to put in, or there's a fixed address that it works with. You are able to be a lot more creative, knowing that you don't have a choice to just walk in and swap out this equipment. You've got to make it work. So that's another nuance you get in healthcare. And I guess the final thing to say is, when you think about the stakes in healthcare, they're a lot higher than in a lot of other industries. And so the value of healthcare data, of your electronic health record, is, the last time I read about it with the Verizon breach report, was, I think, over $400. And so you look at that compared to the value of a breached credit card information, which is, it's nothing. It's pennies to the dollar, a cents to the dollar, I should say. So, when you think about it that way, it forces you to be very diligent in how you manage and protect information. But, in IT and in security, which are two areas that I work in, we don't do change very well. We're often very hesitant to change. We tend to resist change. And in a lot of cases, the organizations that we support move so much faster than we do. Now we end up playing catch up, and then we accuse the business of, performing shadow IT. And in a lot of cases, shadow IT is just a failure of IT and security to adapt to the needs of the business.
And that's very interesting, Nemi. I picked up a few things in what you said, and one thing which sort of I want to double down is healthcare technology innovation and then disruptive innovation going forward. So if you start connecting the dot, obviously you did mention, there's this regulatory bodies, you're going to work within the remits, and you've got your challenges, whether it's resistance or whether it's inside out resistance or outside in resistance, but there is that, right? And then there is this customers of yours who are moving at a light of speed, right, in terms of technology adoption. And then this the whole world is seeing AI being adopted at a massive scale, level, speed, right? So I just want to double down on your perspective, and I'll get into the cyber security in a minute, but just in this whole healthcare business, how would innovative technology rather be adopted? And what is your view on it? Will it be adopted? Do you still see the same level of resistance? Are you seeing things changing as you move forward? What's your vision in that space?
I think there are two sides to that question, and this is the way I kind of look at it. There is the clinical side, the doctors, the practitioners, the clinicians, right, the dentists who are working. They embrace change open-handed, right? They want to use it. And then there is the IT side of it, where we are meant to be enabling this change. And in a lot of cases, we resist the changes. And I'll kind of try to explain those a little bit. So let's take the view of change from a clinician, and in this case, let's use a dentist. And you just have to sort of visualize this with me. So you have a dentist who is working with a patient. They have the gloves on, right? And every 15 minutes, the computer times out because someone in IT or someone in security says our timeout period is 15 minutes. So now the dentist has to take up the glove, go type in the password on the computer because they cannot use the gloves after, sticking it in people's mouths to go type on the keyboard. So they have to take up the gloves, type the password on the keyboard, get a new set of gloves, come back and start continuing to work, right? Extremely disruptive. Now you bring in technology and say, we're going to do badge tap, or we're going to do Windows Hello, where you can just look at the IR camera and it logs you back in. That dentist is jumping at the bits because of that technology. You take something like perio, periodontist, a hygienist is essentially probing a patient's gums to see how good or bad their gums are. You go through, and hopefully everyone has had a perio examination, so this would make sense to you. And the dentist essentially, or the hygienist in most cases, is probing the tooth to see how far those pocket depths go. And they maybe probe at best 4, maybe if you have great memory, 6 of your teeth, and then they have to stop. And then they have to go to the computer and type in pocket depth. So it's like 433, 222, whatever the case is, per teeth, right? They've got to type that in. They got to come back, continue probing, go back to the computer and type it in. One of the things that my organization just built is an AI engine that is able to sample and analyze the doctor's voice or the hygienist's voice, and essentially you just talk. So rather than typing in the patient's numbers or pocket depths, you just speak. And irrespective of the ambient noise around you, the computer, using no accessories, no headsets, nothing, just the default mic on the computer, it's able to pick up your voice and is able to apply the numbers to the right tooth. And you just look at it in the end and you validate and away you go without having to touch the keyboard. I'll give you one last example. With X-ray images, an X-ray of a tooth is an extremely small image. And a lot of times, dentists err on the side of caution. So you might need to do a root canal when you probably don't need one because of how, what they're able to detect from the X-ray. Now we're able to build in AI that goes in and says, oh, actually, you maybe don't need a root canal, or the reverse might be the case. Maybe you did not see that a root canal was needed. Maybe you didn't see that there was a fracture on the tooth. Maybe you didn't see that there was an abscess within the gum line. Now we can use AI to scan that image and compare it with millions of other images in seconds. And we're then able to provide that information to the dentist. And again, the AI is not diagnosing the patient. The AI is just saying, you might want to consider ABC based on our analysis. So if you're a doctor, I don't see anyone who would be, resistant to that, because you are enhancing the clinical workflow. You're making it more efficient, you're making it faster and so on. And then you switch onto the IT side, and I use a different example. You think about things like cloud. Let's talk about AI. Let's talk about mobile devices, working from home. Let's just use those 4. And if to all the security people listening to this podcast, if we're honest with ourselves, what was your first reaction 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 5 years ago, when you heard that your company was going to adopt AI? Your company was going to let everyone work on their mobile phones using their personal computers. Everyone was going to be able to work remotely from Starbucks, whatever the case might be, or even just SaaS. We're going to go away from IT having to install applications and patch those applications in your endpoint, and now the service provider can just provide patch over the air without IT being in the middle. And a lot of IT professionals, a lot of security professionals would have freaked out at the very thought of their organizations doing any of these things, right? Just 2 years ago, when AI and ChatGPT and Copilot came around, I cannot even tell you how many CISO roundtables I attended. And the conversation was, oh, what are you going to do? Are you going to block it? Or are you? And I was like, no, I'm not going to block it. I don't even know what people are using it for. I want to understand the technology first before deciding whether to, block it. But the default for a lot of security professionals was just AI is evil. You've got to block it. And they just, blocked it. And I can tell you that a bulk of folks, are now having to reverse and use it. And I'm not saying that we should just blindly embrace all technology, but you really can't restrict things that you don't understand. You've got to invest the time to understand the pros, the cons of technology, and then see if it's a force for good, see what guardrails you need to put in place, and then understand how that might be a challenge or risk for your organization. And the final point to make is, in a lot of cases, even when there is a risk, it is not always the job of IT or security to make that decision unilaterally for the organization. We report into, execs or the board or whatever. We should take the time to explain the risk to them. And a lot of these decisions are business decisions, not technical decisions. And I think that's an area that we've kind of missed the mark a little bit. And in security, we feel we're the judge, the jury, and the executioner of what we feel is right for the organizations.
Thank you, Nemi. And our listeners have heard till now the creative side of a technologist in Nemi, right? You gave those 3 use cases on the clinical side, which I think that's just tip of the iceberg. There's so much to do. Now I want to highlight on Nemi, the cybersecurity expert, right? And Nemi, the expert who, wears a different hat and wants to protect data, wants to ensure that while the experience is given, but guardrails are kept and regulation is followed, right? What's that side of Nemi talking? What's that side of Nemi looking at the challenges, and how is Nemi trying to adapt all of this yet being innovative? Does it make sense?
Oh, totally. And I think this is where my answer might be interesting to most people. It's the same Nemi, right? It's the same person. And I think a lot of times we 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 mix them up. We feel like there's got to be a completely different persona, and that there's nuances to being the CIO or CTO versus being a CISO. But ultimately, if you really strip it all down, our jobs at the end of the day is using technology to advance the strategic business objectives of the organization. And if you strip, your job is not to protect the company. Your job is to advance the business, the strategic business initiatives of the company. In doing so, you have to protect the company. You have to ensure you align with regulations and so on and so forth. But what comes first is what value is your organization deriving from technology? And if we all agree to align with that first, then at least we have a North Star. We're working towards the same thing. The second thing is understanding the organization. And this is where, again, very similar to a technology enablement role, you've got to understand the organization. Because if you do, then you focus your efforts on what makes sense. Now, let's talk about the security part of it a little bit more. The first thing I talk about, because in security we talk about controls, which sometimes I think we do a little bit too much talking about controls because it's got certain negative connotations. But a lot of controls that we implement in security are restrictive, but don't really achieve a lot of strategic or, frankly, security value. And I'll give you some examples. I'm going to try not to mention any particular products here, but let's take email protection, link protection, URL protection as an example. You have a solution where if you had a link in your email and you clicked on that link and that link was meant to be restricted for whatever reason, then that link is restricted. However, if you had your email open on one screen and you open up a browser and you simply typed in the URL in the browser directly, but not going through your email, it allows the browser to open. So it's like putting a gate, right, in front of your house or a door, and you push the door and the door is locked. But if you just had the common sense to turn the handle, you could get in. A lot of controls in security are that way. We put in barriers that, certain people are restricted and certain people are not. I'll give you another example. And I can do a whole podcast about these. Let's take BYOD. You have BYOD implementation on an Android device versus an iOS device. On iOS devices, you simply have one profile. You have one app. So if you're using, let's take Outlook, it's one Outlook. If you use a mail, it's one mail client. If you were on a Samsung device or an Android device, you have a business persona and you have a personal persona. So now you have two different apps. If I wanted to copy a contact from my business app to my personal profile, in this case, I'm restricted from doing so on an Android device. But if I was on an iOS device, it doesn't matter because there's only one client. So it lets me do it anyway. And so I've challenged people, as using this as an example, how many iOS devices do you have in your organization versus Android devices? And in some cases, it's 80 to 20, right? 80% iOS, 20% Android. And you've implemented a policy that 80% of your organization simply bypass. Even better, they don't even know it exists because it doesn't apply to them. And it only applies to 20% of your organization because of the device type that they're on. Like, it makes no sense, however you look at it, right? And so with my security hat on, I'm always looking at how effective are my controls? How far-reaching are these controls? Or am I putting in a control that just gives me the illusion of security and my users are just able to walk right through it, especially if they just tried a little bit, right? And when you have security controls that are porous, like, the Swiss cheese approach to security, those are the sort of controls that people hate because they just look at you as getting in the way of them doing business. But if you take a step back and going back to kind of where we started, what is the business trying to achieve? What are the strategic objectives? What is the value stream that organization is trying to do? And looking at the value stream, you got to look at, people, suppliers, technology, all of those things. And then based on that, you ensure that you have the right set of controls that are appropriate to the assets that you're looking to protect. And whatever you do, you've got to do it in consultation with the business, right? You cannot have security going south and the business going north. You've got to have the business alongside you.
Yeah, and as your partner at Movate, and now that we've been working for some time together, one thing we've particularly liked about your leadership style, Nemi, is how you actually don't see this as two different persona. That's what you said at the beginning as well, right? It has its own nuances for sure, but at the end of the day, more importantly, security, IT have to be or should be seen as an enabler rather than as a detractor. So, and that's what we love about, working with you, working with your team. I want to now sort of pivot a little bit towards your passion, right? And as I was giving my introduction about you at the beginning, I was talking about, your way of giving back to the society. And one of the things, at least what we learned, is through ISACA, where you're the chapter lead in the Orange County as well. Want to hear about your involvement with ISACA, and for the listeners also, right? People who have achieved a certain position, have achieved a certain, or at a certain phase in their career where they can give back to the community, right? What would your 2 cents be to them?
Absolutely. I think we've talked long enough in IT and especially in security about the lack of talent. And as I say to my team and everyone else, talent is not going to fall from the sky unless we discover aliens from a different planet that will show up on Earth and be security experts. The talent that we are looking for or the talent we have. There's not a special group out there. There's not a special country with special talent. There is not a special state. It's what you have is what you have. And as leaders and practitioners, we really need to get off this bandwagon of, we've got a talent shortage. And where I'm going with this is organizations like ISACA and ISC Squared and SANS and all of these are great organizations for, just networking and understanding what's new, what's coming, how should we interface with technology, what are the new standards out there. And we do several, so many different activities. We have a monthly evening meeting. Most other groups have, different meetings. We work with other sister organizations like the IIA, the ACFE, and there's several organizations we work with. The CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance, is another one that we partner with locally. And we organize academic events. So there's training, heavily subsidized training, and they can come in, they can get the training, they get the exam vouchers, and in a lot of cases, if they pass the exams, we refund all or most of their exam fee. So it's all about giving back. It's about training people in these core certifications that they need for their career. In addition to that, we've partnered with a number of organizations, just to mention a few. Trend Micro, Palo Alto, Attack IQ are three great partners that we work with. We organize training events, capture the flag events, red teaming events. Pantera is another one that we've worked with, and they provide labs and training and hands-on training for our members so they can learn and sharpen their skills. And I will tell you that of all the things we do, the training and the technical training are about the best things that we do, because we've had so there's about 50 people usually, maybe a little bit more, that attend these sessions. And we have everyone from CIOs, CISOs, all the way to interns, all in the same room. We break them up into groups, and then they work on these exercises. And for a lot of people, that might be the only time they get to sit with a C-level IT leader as peers, working together, brainstorming, trying to solve a common problem. And they don't get that when they go back to their jobs or when they go back to their colleges and so on. So, to those listening, if you're not a member of these associations, I would strongly suggest that you join one. We are in Orange County, so if you're in Orange County, feel free to reach out to us. But if you're not, ISACA is a global organization in several countries around the world.
And I must say, on behalf of the listeners, ourselves, Nemi, thank you for what you're doing. I think you're doing a great thing. Like you said, we are all in dearth of talent, and instead of just cribbing about it, can we do something to to elevate that quotient, right? So thank you for what you're doing, what the organization is doing. We're towards the fag end of our podcast, and I'm itching to ask you this because I've learned about this that you're a tea collector. So I'm very very curious. How did this all start? And what are we talking about when we say tea collector? I hear there's a cupboard full of tea bags, or so. What's that hidden thing about Nemi which our listeners don't know?
Well, I love tea. I didn't even know where it started or how it started. Maybe growing up in the UK or I don't know. But I never. Here's the first thing I would say, and the tea purist out there would be stabbing me through the phone. I never drink. I never have a single tea bag. That's almost a golden rule. I always mix up my tea. So I look at tea like I'm creating a cocktail, right? I want to have this flavor and that flavor, and I'm always combining the flavors together. So it makes tea a lot more interesting. Whereas if you wanted to get the same flavor profile with coffee, and nothing wrong with coffee for the coffee drinkers out there. I actually read an article yesterday that said the UK is becoming a country of coffee drinkers, and no one is drinking tea anymore, which is upsetting a bunch of folks. But with coffee, you can achieve similar, but you have different flavors and a lot of artificial bits and bobs to achieve various different flavor profiles. But anyway, yeah, I do love tea. I collect tea from everywhere I can. India, obviously, the UK, South Africa, as much as I can. I sometimes I'm lazy and I don't do loose leaf teas, but when I can, I let it brew and just and plus frankly it's my way of drinking water selfishly. So I'm always drinking tea. And yes, I do have a mini, if you think about the big red London booth, I have one of
Yeah.
those, a mini version, not quite mini, it's about maybe a third of the size in my office, and it does have just tea. So yes, it is a thing.
Good, fantastic. Nemi, this has been enlightening, and I enjoyed the conversation. I hope you liked it too. Thank you for the valuable insights. And as we wrap up, any last two key messages for the audience in terms of a professional takeaway, a personal message, as we conclude this podcast, Nemi?
Yeah, I'll say two things. Kind of summing up what I said earlier. The first is you have to drive change. I speak to a lot of people and they ask me, how did you get so far in your career and relatively in a relative short time? And I say, well, there's no secret. The secret is, if there is one, it's you've got to drive change. It's as simple as that. And I use an example of the coffee table. We live in an age where everyone feels they need to have a coffee table. And the problem with coffee tables is even those who don't drink coffee all want to have a coffee table, right? And it sits there at the corner, it gathers dust, it becomes the bookshelf, it becomes the stand for the remote control, it becomes everything else other than a coffee table, but it's there. And everyone knows it's there. And that's the way some of us are, right, at our jobs. You're the guy who does X, and everyone knows you're there. But people don't really know what value you offer. But they know you're the endpoint guy, you're the AV guy, you're the whatever guy. We have all these labels. And I think you've got to break away from labels and titles. And we all need to be able to go home at the end of the day, right? And in my case, my 4-year-old holds me accountable. I come back home every day and he has the same question for me every single day. What did you learn today, Dad? What did you do today? And I don't know if he knows why he's asking it, but it forces me to think. Like, I actually did this today. And there are days I go home and I'm like, you know what, kid? I don't know. I just had a bunch of meetings and I just had a bunch of stuff and the day was over and I didn't know what I did. And so you've got to solve business problems. You've got to make a change. And then the final thing, and this is more on the security side, just embrace the business, right? And that starts with communication, speaking to people, understand what you are protecting. You cannot be a security professional if you're not in the throes of power, if you're not in the corridors of power, if you're not speaking to the people that matter. So you know what ultimately matters to the organization. You would just be advancing your own selfish, myopic agenda and not driving the strategic objectives of your organization.
Thank you. Thank you, Nemi. Thank you once again for your time. Enjoyed this conversation and look forward to talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time and all those listening. Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and do share your thoughts in the comments section. We can't wait to bring you the next episode, so stay tuned for more.